Questions being asked is whether the justices will issue a wide or a narrow ruling. What does that even mean?
On this disqualification issue? Well, I mean, there are a variety of ways that they could dispose of this case. One would just be, for instance, a narrow ruling might just address the fact that the Colorado decision was on the primary rather than on the general. Might just address Colorado rather than issuing a ruling that would apply to all of the states. I think the notion of like a narrow ruling that would potentially, and I know that there are people making this argument, but that would leave some of this back to the states. I don't think that would be good for the country. I don't think it's good for there to be this uncertainty that's going to be playing out over months. That's my own personal view. So I would be surprised if the Supreme Court kind of let something play out that was so narrow that it allowed all of these political actors in all of the states to sort of fill the gaps. But that's what folks are talking about.
Kara, let's move on to the classified documents case down in Florida, Mar-a-Lago. Trump's lawyers are expected to try to get the judge to throw this whole case out. Now, this judge, Aileen Cannon, has shown, I don't know what the best way to say it, favoritism in the past. She has gone out of her way to be, at the very least, deferential to Trump and his team.
Yes, I would just remind your great viewers, who probably remember because you've drilled it into them a few times, that she became infamous because she ruled in a way that no judge has ever ruled before, that Donald Trump should have access to these classified records and the government should not be able to look at them while they were in the middle of a live criminal investigation to try to secure the possible compromise of national security records. Remember, the government was freaking out that some of this material had leaked, that some of its operatives could have been compromised, that intelligence about Iran and China and how we learn about nuclear programs could be in the hands of other foreign adversaries. I mean, they were sweating it. And this judge said, you know what? You guys can't touch that stuff anymore. Well, an appellate court swooped in and said, OK, there's no law under the sun in which that's appropriate. So she looked foolish, but she also looked like she was leaning hard towards Trump. And everybody looked at her like, well, what's going to happen next? And what's happened next is that she's leaned over to repeatedly find ways to delay this case and put off the opposite of Judge Chutkan, by the way, in January 6th investigation, ways to put off the potential future litigation over motions and the ultimate trial.
All right, let's go to Fulton County, Georgia. Donald Trump's lawyers are now going after Fani Willis, not because of the personal relationship she has with someone on her team, but now this is about a speech she gave last month, something she said about race. Fill us in. What do you think?
So the DA gave a speech over the Martin Luther King weekend. It was her first response to the allegations about her being in this relationship and potential financial interest in the prosecution. And she essentially said that her critics were attacking her because of race. And I will say I was not a fan of this speech. I actually wrote about it, and I was quite critical of it. I thought it was evasive, and I thought it was, frankly, beneath a prosecutor or a public official who's
unnecessary
elected.
At the very least.
Very unnecessary and actually counterproductive. However, the argument that Trump's lawyers have made is that the speech was so incendiary and was extrajudicial, meaning it was outside of the courtroom, that was so prejudicial that she should be disqualified for injecting race into the case and tainting all the defendants and defense counsel. I think that's a very ambitious argument. I don't expect it to get much traction because I was not a fan of the speech, but it was careful enough, I thought, to avoid that sort of red line. But that's what's going on here, and that's the issue that's going to be in front of the judge.
But in the court of public opinion, like, no bueno. Things are not working out in Fani Willis's world. Does one wonder why make this speech? Why add insult to injury? Why bring attention to yourself right now?
Well, now what is at risk for Fani Willis and for the state of Georgia and for the elections at large is that Fani Willis will become the thing that jurors are focused on, that the public is focused on, as opposed to the case that she's bringing. So it's not just a distraction, but it is potentially a way, as Trump's lawyers are arguing now, to undo the prosecution. Now, again, not sure they're going to be successful with that. His lawyers are doing, in a lot of these cases, they're throwing, what's the S word, spaghetti against the wall.
There you go. There you go.
But she is, potentially sabotaging her own case here. And she's going to have to make a decision about whether she can ride this out and continue to prosecute and not have a problem with that prosecution, or if she is so much getting in the way of this case that the case is more important than her role in it.
You wrote a column today for New York Magazine that was really interesting because it's important, but it's like an abstract that what people don't think about yet. What it would actually look like if Donald Trump were convicted and sentenced to prison? Lay it out for us. Because let me tell you, Carol would have to cover every single minute of it. Just so you know, this would be her new life. She'd know every prison guard.
So we spent several months actually working on this piece to try to really explore the whole full spectrum of options that would be available and where they would end up. And where we landed was, look, if Trump stands trial in Washington, I fully expect him to be convicted for a variety of reasons.
Hold. Do you think he will stand trial in Washington? Because it's noteworthy that you said if he does.
It's going to be up to look, he can stand trial in Washington. There's enough time. He should, in my estimation. The public wants to. Whether he will is going to be up to the Supreme Court.
Do you believe he will?
Yes, I do. Sitting here right now, I do, actually, because I think the D.C. Circuit's opinion was surprisingly strong to me. I was expecting them to reach the result that they did, but it was surprisingly strong. I think the Supreme Court would be well within its rights to deny cert and let that decision stand. And that the trial could go forward. But I don't know.
Carol?
I was just going to say I agree, not as a prosecutor, but as a journalist who's written about court filings. I thought the circuit would land where it did. I had no idea how well they would craft it to say, Supreme Court, we got this. You know, they gave a lot of options for the court to say, it's okay, this is resolved. You're done. So I'm with you. I don't usually put down any money on bets that are speculative, but I think the chance of a trial this year is increased.
Wow.
And the Supreme Court loves to be able to say this is a political issue.
We're out.
And so the Circuit Court has now given them, as Carol points out, just given them this incredible off-ramp to do.
The Supreme Court has more than enough on their plate right now. Carol said it before. They get their track shoes on, their sweatpants. They're like, we don't need to worry about this. Thank you all for starting us off this evening. Great. Is it a leadership issue with Republicans, or are House Republicans incapable of being led?
I think the answer is yes. I mean, to put it in a parlance, I think that Mr. Johnson would understand. He's like the pastor that finally gets to take the pulpit, like when everybody's on spring break, right? Like he's really excited. But then if he had to do it on a regular Sunday, like he ain't up to the job. He's not up to this job either. He was a backbencher, right? Nobody'd ever heard of him. And now he's sitting in the big chair and he can't figure out how to do any of this stuff. Right? Like, I'm sure Kevin McCarthy is smoking a cigar, drinking a glass of wine somewhere, just laughing his tail off at all of this. And I think that to lose twice in one day just speaks to a dysfunction that one member, Eli Crane, whoever the heck he is, right? Like, that's what they want. And you talk about leadership. This happened because Donald Trump wanted it to happen. And remember that they are responsible for all of this stuff based on the fact that they have not, will not, and haven't ever stood up to him. And as I've said before, Stephanie, we got a long way to go, but this is the kind of stuff that's going to cost Republicans dearly in the fall, because if there's two things, voters really care about, one is competence. They want their government to be competent, even if they don't really like it. And the thing they like least is corruption. And that's what these guys have in spades. Donald Trump is the epitome of incompetence and the epitome of corruption all in one. And so what we saw this week shouldn't surprise any of us. It was always going to come this way.
Well, Reed laid it out for Democrats if they're watching. Do you believe, Maria, there's a way for Democrats to capitalize on this dysfunction?
Yes.
Yeah, in a word, yes.
Yes. Well, look, I mean, the fact that what did he say? He said, I don't care about basic governance. Then you're in the wrong job, because your job is literally to govern and to actually make laws and to actually make the American people feel like someone is taking care of them, because that's why they voted for you. But I think the challenge with the Democrats is that they have swaggered. They actually have all this legislation. We actually have a Biden bounce on the economy, and no one's owning it.
They got to get their groove on.
Yes, they do. Because you know who's not really into them right now? When it comes to the Republicans, the folks in Nevada, right? What we saw today with Nikki Haley, like they are very clear that who they want on the Republican side to govern is Donald Trump. And Donald Trump led us down a rabbit hole of mess. Why do the American people want that? Because they're not being reminded of what happened under Donald Trump. But what they can't do is be reminded of what happened when a multicultural America came out and voted, and they brought in Biden, and they are now in a place where they can actually see results of that vote. But they actually have to, the Democrats really have to own it, and they have to have that swagger.
Reed, Maria brought it up. Nikki Haley is fresh off an embarrassing loss, right? Her loss to none of these candidates in Nevada. Not a good look. However, she came out swinging with some pretty strong statements, and watch how she's spinning it.
Look at what happened yesterday. Republicans lost a bill on the border. Republicans lost a bill on supporting Israel. The RNC chair lost her job. Donald Trump was found that he's not immune from any of the charges that are coming up. It is total chaos.
Reed, Chuck Todd wrote today that Donald Trump is the #1 reason for political dysfunction in the House. But what do you make of Nikki Haley finding her swagger and calling it out?
Well, I will say this. Ambassador Haley just cut about 72 Lincoln Project ads that will run about 6 million times in the course of the next 9 months. But what I would say this is, too, is that, look, she's understood now what it feels like, which is she, unlike her, home state senator, Tim Scott, is not up for ritual humiliation. She's going to go out swinging. And so I'll say this, I think we need to impart a little bit of three-dimensional chess here, gang, right? Okay, she's not going to be the nominee. Fine, right? But here's what I can tell you. The longer she's in the race, saying stuff like she said after Nevada, the better for the country, because there are a whole bunch of Republicans that we saw in Iowa, that we saw in Nevada. And look, 31%. Trump can't afford to lose half of that. He can't afford to lose a third of that. He can't afford to lose 20% of that when it comes to Republicans. And so every day she's out there saying this, there are more and more Republicans, and I think I've said this to you before, Stephanie, who see Nikki as someone they used to support. A Mitt Romney, a John McCain, a George W. Bush. That's the party they want back. And so, yes, is Donald Trump the owner of the GOP? He is, but it is smaller, it is older, it is whiter, it is nuttier, right? And there are a whole bunch of Republicans like I used to be, Stephanie, who say, I really don't want this anymore. And so she should stay out there as long as she can, as long as she wants to. It's not about winning the nomination. It's about Donald Trump having to come, as Maria said, with defense on the left as the president, and Democrats should be beating the heck out of him, while Nikki Haley's over here on his right, dinging him on losing a step, being unhinged, blowing up the debt, all of this stuff. This is prime time for us, guys. We got a real chance here.
Maria, President Biden is very clearly trying to get something done on the border right now. But from a narrative perspective, are things too late? Because when you think about the last 3 years and how much Republicans have been beating on this over and over, even I live in blue New York City,
Yep.
and people are talking about the migrant crisis all the time. If you watch local news in New York, every other story is about this.
Well, I think this is where the Democrats, and I would encourage the president to really think about what is happening at the border is not immigration policy. By the time someone shows up at the border, there is no resource for them. And what the president did so effectively around Ukraine, he explained to the American people what the problem was, why it was a national security issue. He framed it for the American people. He has not done that.
But he was talking about Ukraine from the beginning.
From the beginning. But what he has not done is he has not explained the complexity of what we're facing at the border. Because it's not just Venezuelans. We're seeing an influx of Chinese. We're seeing an influx of Indians, of Haitians and stuff. Why are they coming? And why is it all of a sudden just our issue? It's a Western hemispheric issue. We need to bring in Canada. We need to bring in Colombia, who's absorbed close to 2 million Venezuelans. We need to reframe it and say, look, part of the challenge that we have right now is that for the last 45 years, we have not had a Latin American policy. But guess who has been paying attention to Latin America for the last 45 years? Russia and China. What do they have that they are actually, how are they involved in the crisis at the border? And how do we reframe that as a national security issue? Because I deeply believe it is. And at the same time, how do we remind people that the Gang of Eight was all about the undocumented people that have been here for the last 20, 30 years, who have roughly 16 million American children on the sidelines ready to vote if the president addresses their needs?
We keep hearing people say they don't feel good about the economy. And I can point to one economic number after another to try to convince you that things are really good. But if you're like a lot of people, it doesn't matter. So is it the economy they're talking about? Or is that really code for life? How do they feel about their life right now? About everything? Because there are a lot of things out there leaving people kind of feeling meh. I'm going to give you one example. Connecting with friends and family. It is very different after the pandemic. One thing we have been missing post-COVID is connection. It's been widely documented we are in a crisis of loneliness. Great Britain has designated a minister of loneliness. One county in California has declared it a public health emergency. And while working from home has opened up job opportunities for people across the globe, it has also led to hollowed out city centers and empty office buildings where there's just not a lot of people or chances to connect. Couple that with the presidential election, where it is looking more and more like a rematch between a 77-year-old and an 81-year-old. And polling shows neither inspires a feeling of newness or optimism in the way that Obama, Clinton, or Ronald Reagan did. So when you take that and add it to higher prices on some everyday things that should give us joy, like going to a concert or a sporting event, or when the price of a Happy Meal doesn't even make you happy, that starts to change your outlook. Put on top of all of that our divided, grievance-driven media and this feeling that others are getting ahead, then when the pollster calls and asks how you feel about the economy, i.e., how you feel about life, despite all the good, positive facts out there, is it really a surprise that people are saying they just don't feel so hot? With us for more, Neil Irwin, chief economic correspondent for Axios. So what's your take on this? Why aren't people feeling it?
Look, prices have gone up a lot since 2019. There's no question about it. Inflation was really high in 21 and 22. That's a long time ago now. Like, inflation has been coming down since then. But even the low inflation we've had is on top of what we had in 21 and 22. So you still have people with higher prices. Yeah, there's jobs out there. People don't, it's great to have great job opportunities. But as you're saying, people just feel bad about the entire environment. People feel bad about the post-pandemic. Everything is felt messed up, and that legacy is not going away quickly. It's going away slowly. It's not going away quickly.
What is going to change it? Is there one trigger? Is it interest rates getting cut?
So time seems to be helping. We've just in the last couple of months gotten some really good numbers on consumer sentiment, consumer confidence. These surveys that come out every month, they have taken a big swing up in the last couple of months. The question is, does that happen on a time scale that really helps Joe Biden in the election in November? Or is this a much slower play thing where people aren't going to feel better until years pass of a solid labor market and declining inflation? We don't know that.
But if we do get a rate cut, right, one of the big issues when you think about people out there trying to buy their first home, it's not happening. Do you think we're going to get a rate cut before the election? And assuming we do, when will people start to feel that?
Yeah, interest rate cuts are probably coming, probably not March. That's what Jay Powell, the Federal Reserve Chair, kind of signaled last week. A lot of his colleagues have been saying the same thing. Probably not, next month, but there probably are interest rate cuts from the Federal Reserve coming. It might take a while, might be May, June. I think we've already seen, though, the prospect of rate cuts has gone into the stock market. The stock market's new highs every day lately. That's a good sign for wealth. That's a good sign for people feeling good. Job market's on fire. Job growth is incredible. Those are all good signs. If that can continue while inflation keeps remaining low or falling, that's a good mix for the economy. Again, it's just a question of, does that kick in terms of people's perceptions quickly enough?
How fragile is the economy, though, right? Things seem to be very strong, very positive, only getting better. Are there any red flags you see in the immediate future?
Look, there are always fragilities in the economy. There's always things that can go wrong. War in the Middle East, China and Taiwan, an energy crisis. Things can always happen. A banking crisis like we had last spring. There's nothing on the horizon that's imminent that looks like one of those risks. That doesn't not to say it can't happen. It's just that, like, right now, things are lined up pretty well for a solid job market, lower inflation. This is the kind of Goldilocks economy that economists have wanted for years. We've just had 2 straight years of the unemployment rate under 4%. Hasn't happened since the 1960s. That's amazing.
When you look at high prices, especially on things like the grocery store, right? When anybody goes to the grocery store, we're still feeling like things are expensive. People often point to this idea of greedflation, which others would say this is just capitalism, right? Prices are set at a level that people are willing to pay. When people decide things cost too damn much, then the prices go down. What is your take on this?
Yeah, look, we're seeing some signs already that consumers are saying enough, right? I can't pay this much for eggs, for everything else in my grocery basket, and that retailers, wholesalers are responding by trying to adjust their pricing, their mix. I think the question is, Will that continue? Is that something that's really set in motion? And can this disinflation continue? Look, there was an opportunistic price increases back in 21, 22. Companies felt like they could raise prices because there was huge demand, finite supply. That's not the situation quite anymore. Demand is softening, supply is rising. Those are coming into balance. And you know, it's a slow process, but it's happening.
We no longer have a supply chain issue, or as Donald Trump likes to call it, supply change. Neil, thank you so much.